Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby.
Hello and welcome to Movies vs. Capitalism. I'm Rivka Rivera.
And I'm Frank Capello.
It's early, listeners. We're recording our topical rather early because we're both slammed with lots of work because
that's true.
That's life, 2024, all the jobs.
Yeah, we just got to squeeze it in whenever we can. And I started a new job recently that is totally like it's a 9 to 5. And it's like, now I'm not available at that time. So when's the other time? It's either early in the morning or it's late at night. And you know what? That's what we do. That's what we do for you all to bring this show to your ears.
Yeah. And my kids, it's show day for us. My kids are performing well, I kind of did like a waiting for Guffman situation that we ended up with. They're performing Curtain Ensemble's version of Alice in Wonderland. Curtain Ensemble is their improvised characters that they've been working on. So like we're kind of spoofing just theater companies in general.
That's fun.
It's fun. And they go on.
That's very
they
fun.
go on
Are these
today.
the STEM students?
No, they would be horrified. Could you imagine science? No, I wouldn't do that to them. That would be, no, these are the junior, like they're middle schoolers that I work with throughout the year. Science stuff starts this summer, so I'm sure I'll be sharing all of the exciting and terrifying things I learn along the way.
Mm-hmm. Before we get into our topical, I had a question for you real fast. I saw a movie over the past weekend that I was very excited for. Furiosa, a Mad Max saga. Maybe we'll cover it at some point in the podcast. We should definitely cover Fury Road, but I was curious because have you seen Fury Road?
The first one?
The one that came out about 9 years ago with Tom Hardy and Charlize.
Yeah, I remember having a good time in the theater. I think I saw it at one of these giant theaters that is now unfortunately just shut down because they're shutting down so many cinemas, which is so sad. But yeah, I did enjoy it, but I can't remember the themes. I just remember being like screaming a lot out of joy.
Yeah. It's like post-apocalyptic, nuclear fallout, gasoline is the most precious resource on the planet.
Steampunky, kind of.
Very, future wasteland, like disgusting radioactive
Not
steampunk.
an aesthetic that I really enjoy, to be honest.
I've heard this a couple of times, and I totally, if someone says that, if that's their read, I'm like, that's fair, because like this world is gross. Like George Miller like wants this to look like a disgusting world. But I really enjoyed Furiosa. It didn't do very well at the box office, and people are like, it's not as good. But I don't know, it just brought up all of the Fury Road discourse again, and I've just been hearing a lot of people being like, yeah, Fury Road is like up there with like Lawrence of Arabia and The Godfather and, like 2001, like in its estimation has only grown, and people are like, this might be in like the top 50 movies of all time. This might be the single best action movie ever made.
But that's so funny to me because you say Lawrence of Arabia and The Godfather, and I'm like, sorry, not my...
Who fucking cares?
Like, who fucking cares? Like, okay. I'm running from a group of people who are like, best movies of all time. Lawrence of Arabia.
Sure.
Godfather.
Okay. All right. We could throw in like, all right, Wizard of Oz and, just like big totemic films.
Wait,
But
I'm imagining you in that circle being like, hey guys, what about the Wizard of Oz?
That's
like,
more relatable,
Frank.
right? Yeah, Fury Road is really the Wizard of Oz of its time.
Yeah.
All right, well, we'll cover it at some point on the podcast, but yeah, just wanted to touch on that because I know it's in the zeitgeist right now. But we did have one thing we wanted to talk about before we get to our interview. You showed me this, so it's
talking
your
about
favorite
AI again.
Your favorite pet topic? Yep, AI.
Because we
Diving back
fucking
in.
should. Because it's just I think we should. It's the summer again. I'm reminded of last summer it was like hot labor summer. We were out in the streets. This was huge. Like we were fighting. It felt like we were fighting against this existential threat. We made some wins, but not nearly enough. And it's not, the temptation is to be like, okay, put that to bed. I guess we'll see. Like, no, it's still an existential threat. And what do I mean by existential threat? Potentially. I don't know. Jury's out, but under capitalism, we got to fight. This is a fight the working class has to take on because
Yeah.
companies are already taking advantage of this moment. So one example, I'm sure there's many, but one that recently came out, there was a Hollywood Reporter article titled "Hollywood Nightmare? New streaming service lets viewers create their own shows using AI." And this is a studio that's a startup out of San Francisco called Fable. Some people may have remembered I didn't know this, there was an AI generated South Park clips that they sort of announced themselves with that weren't great, but people were like, it was, you're like, wait a minute, are you allowed to just steal content and regurgitate it out? And that's the issue here. And the chief executive, Edward Sachi, says the vision of this is he wants Fable to be the Netflix of AI. So I don't know, as I'm saying this, I'm like, I could be someone being like, this guy wants to send DVDs out in the mail, like what? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know where we're gonna land. I think this idea sounds silly, but like, and who fucking knows? Like, who knows? Maybe the vision will come true. But they're basically gonna come out with a slate of a bunch of shows that are already AI generated, meaning the animation, the voice, all of that. The story is created by AI. So essentially stolen material regurgitated. And some of this topics, some of these things, this is a satire in itself, because one of their shows is Exit Valley, which is billed as a satire of Silicon Valley, mimicking the animation style and comedic flavor of South Park. So they're trying to do political satire using it's so meta, it's infuriating. But then the next piece of this is that they're trying to make their big idea is like users are going to be able to make their own episodes of shows, a la Choose Your Own Adventure. You remember those books? Mm-hmm. So you'll be watching a show and you'll be like, I want this to happen next. That's the part that all of the, obviously, the really exploitative, terrible stuff, terrain that this gets into, I'm also like, I would not want to do that. That's just not my choice of viewing experience, to be like, make this happen. What do you, you know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah.
And I remember loving the Choose Your Own Adventure in concept, but I was the reader when it came down to it. I was like, just tell me the story, dude. I don't want to pick my own adventure. I get decision paralysis. Okay, but that aside, let's talk about the potential consequences and like what this actually means. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think this has the potential to exacerbate the problems, the creative problems that Hollywood development have been running into over the last, I don't know, several decades, which is like creating stories based solely on like user algorithmic data. It's like, well, this amount of people want to see this thing, and like this demographic wants to see this thing, and like, oh, there's this cross section over here that kind of both are. So what if we made this story that included a little bit of that and a little bit of that and a little bit of that? And it's like trying to like write narrative in a lab, as opposed to an actual artist coming in and being like, oh, I have a story I want to tell. It's like, this is my story. I have an idea. I have a theme. I have a message, and this is what I want to say. And then it will hopefully find its audience. So the idea of AI just like basically leapfrogging even farther into the future and being like, hey, what do you want, you dumb little baby? Do you want little baby food? Do you want do you want this? Do you want nothing that will ever challenge you? Nothing that will ever like be outside of your already existing purview and like perspective and everything? Here it is. It feels like it'll be like an echo chamber of fucking narrative storytelling, which is, it sounds like completely antithetical to creativity. I don't know if people will gravitate to this. I mean, I'm sure there will be some people who are like, yo, actually, the Fable shows are actually really good. But yeah, and then obviously the labor implications of,
right,
like you said, taking people's work, that they like taking the work of humans and using it to train these AIs to then ultimately replace humans. It's a completely horrific, fucked up dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where I'm at today is and maybe this is me just feeling my artist self. I'm not as worried about, oh my God, this is going to be, people are going to want this, this is going to be great. I mean, I think for certain shows that are already being written to formula and limit the artistic creative capacities, sure. I don't think it's going to replace I don't think it's going to replace art. I don't think I'm worried that AI generation is ever going to reach that. But it's like you said, it's the capitalist implications. It's like what it means for exploiting labor. And additionally, something that I'm just starting to learn about and try and deepen my learning about and get more information on, but there's a whole sustainability aspect that part of the marketing of AI and the lie of AI and all of our technology, frankly, is that it's invisible. And we know that like myths of invisibility are so useful for capitalism. Like it just exists somewhere that has nothing to do with the material land or human labor or flesh or blood or anything. And
or like the massive servers that these programs live on that use up like exorbitant amounts of energy and
exactly. Like I do think we need to start talking more about the potential and very likely and present day material consequences of AI on the climate.
Yeah.
And it feels still, I just recognize this for myself. I'm like, when I talk about it, I've still been talking about it as if it's an invisible thing in the air and as if it's like a thing that happens in a computer, like in the cloud. Like we need to start talking about, there is no fucking cloud, you know? But what a brilliant marketing scam, the cloud. And I fucking felt like I'm today years old, sort of just really unpacking that, like, when my brain, when I talk about the cloud, still holds this image of like it's happening up here and not in our land. And of course it's going to affect our poor communities, our communities of color. So all of this is like, it's all fucking wrapped up. Yeah
100%. The last thing I'll say about this is that what we're seeing right now in the entertainment industry in Hollywood is the industry, because if you've heard anything about like what the state of things are right now, it's like all of the studios, all the streamers, everyone's contracting right now. No one's investing in like new projects. Like no one's able to sell anything. No one's buying anything. The only things they're investing in are like large IP projects because those are the safest bets. And the capitalists at the top of the Hollywood system would say like, well, this is because of the strikes. But no, actually it's because Hollywood and its executives and the studios and the streamers imploded the industry. They completely fucking imploded the industry. Like with the advent of streaming over the last decade, all of these companies were like, oh, well, this is the thing we got to chase now. We got to like basically throw away all of these old systems that we had to try to chase this ethereal future money that will come from whoever becomes the biggest streamer. And, you know, cash was cheap at the time. So everyone was just like throwing money at like all of this stuff. And it created these systems, especially on these streamers that didn't have labor protections of like massive exploitation and like all the things that the writers and the actors were striking over. So it's like these people already fucking imploded their own industry once. And I understand that this Fable company is like a San Francisco based company. It doesn't seem like it's directly tied to Hollywood, but like wouldn't be surprised if we see this kind of thing start to creep into Hollywood. And it's like, how many times do these people need to like just fucking drop a bomb in their own industry and upend everything for the workers mainly? Like, because the executives are fine, they keep their jobs, they are always employed, but it's the workers who suffer through this shit. And it's just like this stupid cycle. And like, you know, I wouldn't be surprised in like 10 years that like the industry contracts again because they're like, oh man, we put way too much into AI and now it's like it's completely upended the entire system. It's like just pay artists, just fucking pay artists. It's that simple.
Well, we'll keep returning to this.
I'm sure
as
we will.
It progresses, you know, and as we learn more. Yeah. But let's get to our conversation about a movie that takes place in a time before we had all of this technology, at least the internet and AI. It's a really great conversation. But of course, before we get to that conversation, we want to remind our audience that we do not sell ads on this show. We donate our ad space to leftist or progressive organizations. Instead, we rely completely on community support to keep the show going. And it helps us in the labor that goes into this. So thank you to everyone who's subscribed. If you haven't subscribed, you can go to our Patreon.
For just $5 a month, you can get access to new bonus episodes and our entire back catalog of bonus episodes. And our Patreon link is in the episode description in your podcast player, or you can find it at mvcpod.com. Also, make sure to, leave us a rating, a review, and subscribe to this podcast on your podcast player so you do not miss new episodes.
All right, we are going to take a break, but we'll be right back with our conversation on Never on Sunday with Nomiki Konst.
Hey everyone, we've got an amazing organization we want to tell you about called Anti-Capitalism for Artists.
Anti-Capitalism for Artists is an education-based community dedicated to raising the class consciousness of artists.
Their core offering, the 10-week Intro to Anti-Capitalism course, is designed to be accessible to anyone looking to get familiar with a wide range of anti-capitalist concepts and ideas.
They do this by offering an eclectic array of free virtual and in-person events year-round, geared to meet all manner of knowledge backgrounds. Frank and I both took the course in different cohorts, and it really was amazing. You get to meet with a group of people who are interested in anti-capitalism, you build solidarity, and it's also a lot of fun.
Yeah, they put together such an amazing, comprehensive reading list from anti-capitalist writers from all different types of tendencies, from Marx to black radicalism to intersectional feminism to queer liberation to modern-day anti-capitalists. So you really get a firm grounding in a diverse and wide array of concepts.
Artists of all kinds, abilities, and professional statuses are welcome to join A4A's community, where they can learn, build community, and co-create their own events and offerings.
You can learn more, reach out, or support their work by donating at anticapitalismforartists.com or find them on Instagram at anticapitalismforartists.
Love you, comrades. Now back to the show. All right, today we are joined by Nomiki Konst, a Greek-American investigative reporter, political analyst, and strategist who is finishing her first feature documentary on Puerto Rico, cryptocurrency, and colonialism. You may know her as a cable news commentator, investigative reporter for TYT, and analyst for Majority Report. She was also a national surrogate for Bernie Sanders' presidential races and represented him on the DNC Unity Reform Commission. She lives in New York City and loves to do yoga, hang out with poodles, and investigate political and real estate corruption in her free time.
That's basically me.
That's a very holistic view of you. I feel like I have the whole scope now.
I've left out a couple weird things, but, you know, sitting in a bathtub and, like, going down Google Dives about real estate developers is a fun thing. And then watching poodle videos 5 minutes later. So
Yeah, you need the balance because you get furious from the real estate developers, and then you just need something cute to take the edge off.
totally.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome to the show. We're so happy to have you on. We met you through our mutual friend of the pod, Harvey K. All of our listeners know him, love him.
Part-time booker at this point.
Part-time booker. But it was really special. We also connected because you are working on this documentary, Losing Puerto Rico. Do you want to talk a little bit about this? It's something that I'm really passionate about. I love what you're doing. I think it's so important. So yeah, I just wanted to give you a moment to share a bit about this work.
Thank you first for having me, and to Harvey the goat. And for coming to we had a little shindig in Brooklyn a few weeks ago where we were testing out some stuff for the film as we're in post-production now, and my brain is like overwhelmed, and you know, I need to talk about these issues in front of folks that may or may not be familiar, but definitely aren't familiar with where we are in our process. So the film it's a feature documentary that we've been working on since Hurricane Maria, which was in the fall of 2017. It started off as a reporting project about disaster capitalism after the storm, you know, already enough juiciness there. Some of the stuff never made it to air because of the transitions media companies make in this capitalist world that we live in. So we ended up saying, you know, let's turn this into a documentary. And the documentary it was pretty much ready to go until a series of crises that occurred after Hurricane Maria on the island led to the governor of the island, Governor Rosemary, who's a son of another governor, had to step down because 1 out of 3 folks on the island showed up on the streets protesting him and his administration for this crazy, for a bunch of events that have been occurring over the last, you know, several years. But there was a chat that was leaked in which members of his administration, his friends, basically insulted every demographic. And so every demographic was like, including journalists, dead people who didn't show up on the streets, but, you know, people who died during Hurricane Maria, elderly, gay people, women, I mean, you name it, that was in the chat. And so folks showed up.
Even Ricky Martin.
Even Ricky Martin, exactly. So he was forced to resign. And so we decided, okay, well, this story is not done. I already had spent a week with a budding crypto community that existed on the island very soon after the storm. And it was fishy and weird, and I could tie it into parts of the story, but there was always this big question as to, well, really why there? It's not just because it's warm. It's not just because there's tax breaks. The most unique tax breaks for Americans in the world. But there's a deeper story as to why cryptocurrency has maneuvered its way through Puerto Rico. And that's the documentary. And we go on a mission with a group of other investigators to discover what's happening. And I don't want to spoil my own movie or scoop myself, but it leads you in directions you never expected. And it coincides with this horrifying displacement crisis that's existing because of some tax breaks that exist on the island due to its colonial status. I mean, Puerto Rico is a colony, and a lot of the things that are happening there occur because there are loopholes in the laws and the financial systems and in the tax code, and keeping it in this territorial status while the island has always been fighting over its identity. Is it independent? Is it free association, having some sort of loose association with the United States? Should the island be a state? Which I feel like your listeners are very intelligent, but it's a nice little reminder. The statehood party is a right-wing party on the island. And so this is sort of being fed to Americans and liberals in particular, thinking that, if it becomes a state, then we're going to get 2 new Senate seats and they'll be Democratic. That's not true. The current resident commissioner, who's like a congressperson that can't vote, was the former co-chair of Latinos for Trump. The current governor is basically George Bush light. I mean, this is the whole island, the representation for the whole island, even though voting is, people aren't showing up to vote for these people. They are the ones who have the money. They have the power. They have the ties to the Fiscal Control Board, the bondholders, Wall Street, the people who are moving to the island, the big developers. I mean, that's the statehood party, to make it very clear. So we're in post-production. Hopefully we'll have a final product for you next year, once we go through film festivals and everything, which you guys are familiar with. And in the meantime, sorry, I buried the lead here. We started a campaign with the coalition of, I think at this point it's over 40 groups on the island and in the diaspora, to close out this loophole, the Act 22 loophole. It's a colonial loophole. It is what is enabling people to move to the island, drive up the cost of real estate over 600% in the last 5-6 years. It is causing massive displacement, and there are folks who want to kick it to the IRS to oversee more, which is like they don't even have the power to go after these guys. Some are saying, well, you just need to make sure that they follow the guidelines. It's like, well, it doesn't matter. I mean, the guidelines are very light. So folks are moving there because they don't want to pay taxes. Does that mean that they won't spend $10,000 on the island? Of course they're going to spend $10,000 on the island because they don't want to pay taxes and they'll save a lot more. So it's a human rights crisis, in my opinion, because the island's already under austerity. Schools are shutting down. Hospitals are shutting down. I mean, there wasn't one in Vieques for a very long time. And even the one that exists now is just like a pop-up hospital. Ferries were underfunded. Everything's being privatized. The Power Authority, that was has been privatized. It's a mess, and it's a mess that was created by capitalism, American Wall Street capitalism.
Yeah, it has a deep history. I'm so moved by all of the work that you've been doing, having family on the island, having lived experience and feeling you can, if you go there and you visit and it's a beautiful place, I think the invitation is to go and be awake to these realities. And if you are looking for them, you will see them immediately. What's occurred to me, it's so ironic because the people who are going over there to live tax-free are also the ones who are politically screaming about anyone coming over to America to live tax-free. And it's just so ironic because the consequence of what's really happening is you shared, people are being pushed out of their homes, the beaches are all being privatized. Anywhere you go, you just feel the consequences of English is being pushed as a language because that is the language of the colonizer currently. It's really bad, but I'm grateful that this film is going to bring more light to it, and hopefully people will check out losingpuertorico.com to learn more.
Sign the petition, share the videos. We've put out 3 videos specifically about the tax breaks because we're trying to get Congress to close that loophole out. We went to a lobby day last week in DC. It was our second lobby day. And we met with, I think, over 40 Congress members, including, staff and senators and Congress members, leadership, bipartisan. I mean, it's a really bizarre thing because, this is pulling revenue from states across the country. And so you do see some sort of bipartisan concern over this. Also, no one likes tax evaders. No one likes money laundering. This, what comes with this is a lot of other nefarious activities. And unfortunately, the way that Puerto Rico is constructed through the United States lens, it's in the shadows, But you're listening to Bad Bunny, you're listening to Ricky Martin, you're watching J-Lo. Benicio del Toro. Let's go through the list of folks that are in our faces all day long. We go there for a vacation. You go on your cruises, and yet you don't know anything about what's happening. And I actually think it's a good segue to the film that we're talking about. And it's probably also why I care about Puerto Rico as of my identity, which there's a lot of similarities, I think. But yeah. Sorry.
No,
we can also talk about Puerto Rico for an hour. I'm happy.
No, I was going to say, as I was watching the film, those similarities were definitely there for me as well. It's like, oh, there's a lot there, and it makes a lot of sense. What were you going to say, Frank?
Oh, I was just going to say we will absolutely make sure to link to everything about the film so that people can access it. Like you mentioned, we got the chance to watch the sizzle reel, and I'm ashamed to say that I didn't know nearly anything about how dire the circumstances were on the island. I think it's an incredibly important story, especially right now, as I'm glad that you're telling it. And it is, I think, a real material rebuttal to anyone, especially like, I don't know, American conservatives who are like, colonialism, that was 200, 300 years ago. Like, it's not a big deal anymore. Like, the story that you're telling in this documentary is such an acute example of the ongoing and the evolution of colonialism and how it's now taken this even darker, more twisted turn with, like, as you mentioned, this crypto money that's been flooding the island. So we'll link to the doc.
Thank you.
Absolutely. But yeah, let's we could just talk about Puerto Rico, but I do want to talk about this movie because
hopefully I can come back on and we could do movies versus capitalism about the movie, like in a year.
Oh, hell yeah.
So there we go.
100%.
Wait, I don't know if I should be on that. I think somebody else should comment on it, but whatever.
No. We've had filmmakers come on and talk about their own films, so we extend that invitation to you.
Thank you.
But the movie we are talking about today is a movie that I had never seen before. I think Rivka and I had either seen before. It is a film called Never on Sunday, released in 1960. This film was written and directed by Jules Dawson, starring Jules Dawson, Melina Mercouri, Georgios Foundas, Titos Vandas, Mitsos Lizig. Oh, man. Mitsos Ligazos.
The top three, I think, are the most
okay. All right, great.
Greek names, man.
You know who I'm talking about.
I do, yeah.
So the box office for this movie was made for $150,000 and has a gross revenue somewhere around $8 million US. That's a capitalist hit right there. If you've never seen this movie, which, probably most of our listeners have not, this is a relatively obscure movie. Nomiki was like, trust me on this. This movie is very good and it's perfect for this podcast. And you know what? She was absolutely fucking right. So,
yay! I'm so happy.
So the synopsis of this movie, if you want to hear it, this is a spoiler conversation. So if you've never seen it, if you want to see it, go watch it. It's free to watch on YouTube in its entirety. So Never on Sunday follows Ilya, a vivacious and independent Greek prostitute who freely chooses her suitors and is not committed to anyone. Her life is filled with music, dancing, and a strong sense of autonomy until she meets Homer, an American amateur philosopher obsessed with ancient Greek culture. Homer believes that he can reform Ilya and guide her toward a more respectable lifestyle through proper upbringing, a regular Pygmalion situation. Meanwhile, a mysterious pimp known as No Face, who already controls all the other prostitutes in the harbor town, seeks to manipulate Ilya. As Homer attempts to impose his values on her, he finds himself enchanted by her exuberant spirit.
So the year this film came out is 1960. John F. Kennedy was just elected president of the United States by defeating Richard Nixon. In May of this year, the Civil Rights Act was introduced, and in November, the Peace Corps was founded. The FDA approved the world's first commercially produced birth control pill, and over 90% of American households had at least one TV, while about 65% of Americans were churchgoers. A slice of pizza cost 15 cents. And in Greece, where this film takes place, the Greek, which I'm sure we'll get into more of these details with you, Nomiki, the Greek Civil War ended almost a decade prior in 1949, but its aftermath continued to affect Greece in the 60s, and it was politically divided with strong anti-communist sentiment. So that is the year 1960, and the question we like to start our conversation with is, why did you choose this film, implore that we watch this film, which we're so grateful for, to discuss on this podcast?
So first, thank you for really giving me the space to do this. I mean, as somebody who's hosted shows, I know how obscure doesn't always mean ratings. So I was like, you really don't have to, but
No, I want people to see this movie. I think this is
Yeah.
like I thought this was a phenomenal movie. It was so much fun. But sorry to cut you off.
no. I
Please-
think this
please
is,
continue.
we can figure out some sort of like, I don't know what the hashtag or the line would be. It could be like prostitute, NATO, like figure imperialism,
Yeah.
like, whatever it is that gets you the clicks.
Sex worker destroys capitalism.
Basically, there it is.
Yeah, basically, yeah. I mean, that's
and
kind of
this
what
is
happens.
the process for everyone listening. That's how it happens.
That's the YouTube headline.
All right, we solved that now. Great. Well, I'm Greek. For folks who don't know, I'm a Greek American. I spend a lot of time in Greece. I saw this movie. It's iconic. I mean, it was nominated. They won for the song from Never on Sunday, which I'm sure people, whether they'd probably recognize it, not knowing where it comes from. It was written for this film, and it was nominated for an Oscar. I think it won Cannes. Melina Mercouri won Cannes. So, as a Greek American, we're very familiar with this film, but I watched it when I was like a kid, like a teenager. And so I interpreted it when I was younger as what I read last night, the reviews did, which was pretty basic. This is a whimsical story. It's a comedy. Melina Mercouri is a great actress. It's, it doesn't really go much deeper than that. But then I watched it again a few years ago, and I was in Greece at the time, and I think it was around 2019 or so. And I was like, oh my God, this is a racking critique of capitalism. And then last night I watched it again, and there's a lot of global perspective. And more recently, I've been doing a lot more research on different threads of Greek history, modern history, because as Greek Americans, we in the diaspora everything that we learn moves through the Greek Orthodox Church. And so a lot of folks say, oh, the diaspora is so conservative because they started making money. I mean, there's a teeny bit of truth to that. But it really depends on what diaspora you come from. If your grandparents came here or your great-grandparents came here, depending how old you are, they were most likely here before the visa rules were attached to how much money you made. And if you had sponsors, my grandparents were refugees. So they were not only poor by Greek standards, they were even poorer because they were from southern Albania in an area that was Greek minorities. It's called Epirus, or Vodio Epirus. So the whole region, it's like northern Greece and southern Albania. Okay. And they had to escape. And my grandfather in particular was escaping Hoja because he was put on a list. So, we're poor. Most of us were Democrats. Dukakis was a Democrat. I think, with exception to people like Spiro Agnew, who didn't really have much association with his Greek identity because of, where his identity, I think he was half Greek, if I recall. A lot of Greek Americans at that generation were more working class. And then as the visa rules changed, it was a wealthier Greek American coming, and they were generally more conservative. And that goes right back to the junta and the Civil War and the multi-divisions that happen in Greece even to this day. I mean, it's amazing. There's a lot of similarities with Puerto Rico, too, if you ever want to play that game. So I started to explore my family history because my dad's father was a Republican in the United States, a fairly involved Republican Party operative. And, what does that even mean back then? I mean, he was still a Republican. He was a New York Republican, but he was also a labor lawyer. So whatever that was in New York State at the time, that's what he was. But he also was
simpler times.
Simpler times, yes. But this is also a man who was the chief of staff to a Congress member, the chair of the Republican Party in Western New York, Erie County. He had, he was supposed to be running for Congress because the Congress member he worked for, John Pillion, was supposed to be Richard Nixon's attorney general if Richard Nixon had won against Kennedy. Mm. So, all these little stories floating around. And P.S., my dad is a socialist, so just so everybody knows, I wasn't raised by Republicans.
Very cool.
There was always just these questions and things about my family, I was raised around him, and just questions about why was he in Nigeria at one point? The Republican Party was imperialist, right? They were very, very involved in global affairs. He was very involved in different aspects of the Republican Party that went right up to Nixon. And then separately, my mom's side of the family was the opposite. They were super, I don't even know what you would say progressive. They were working class Greek immigrants who had nothing, came with nothing. I mean, my grandfather was so poor. He I can't even like tell you. And he came to America and on the last boat coming into Ellis Island in 1954.
Wow.
And I was very close to them. And my grandmother and my grandfather died within 4 months of each other in 2017. And their story is really powerful about leaving their homeland and never being able to go back. And my grandmother was always like, you have to tell the story, you have to tell the story. So she would tell it to me all the time. So I felt like I really knew my mom's side. And then I didn't know my grandfather's side, on my dad's side, because it was super mysterious and like, no one talked about it. And I mean, it was just like, what are you actually, I mean, as I got older, I was like, what is actually going on here? So they all die within a few years of each other. And when my mom's father died, we were going through photos and I saw these photos that we discovered of him in a field with a gun, with like a military squad. And I said, what the heck? I didn't know you were in the military. I knew the other one was World War II vet. And he said, oh yeah, I was in this special mission, but nothing ever happened. And I said, well, what do you mean special mission? He goes, well, the leader of the mission was a double agent. So the mission in northern Greece, this is so complicated, but I promise this relates to the story because it shows you about the identity of Greece being extremely complicated. So they were recruiting the British and the US. I found this out later. He didn't tell me, and he didn't really, I don't think, knew at the time. They were recruiting Southern Albanian men who were Greek, who identified with Greek heritage more than Albanian, who were being oppressed by Hoxha at the time, and were going back and forth from the borders because that's how it used to be back then. Now it's, it was closed off obviously for a very long time. So he had been recruited to infiltrate Albania in a paramilitary operation called Operation Fiend. It ended up being a disastrous situation. Most people died, at least in the first few rounds. And my grandfather never ended up going in because they had found out that the head of their little group, their unit, was a double agent. And, full story, the story that my grandfather always told was that his friend came to him in town and asked him if he wanted to join a meeting. And my grandfather was inquisitive and was like, well, what meeting? And then they got into this debate and he knew that he had to leave Albania or they would kill him that night. But doing all this research, I realized that he would have never been killed for that. I mean, Hoxha was insane, but he wouldn't have killed him. He would have put him in a workers' camp for 25 years like the other guys in the village. And it turns out, I think it's because he was part of this unit and Hoxha's intelligence was very strong. And the whole reason why the US and the UK were using Greece as a front, and very few people knew in Greece that this was what was happening. They thought it was a Greek operation. The reason why is that they thought, because the tension was between Hoxha and Stalin at the time, that Albania was a vehicle into taking on Stalin. And so my grandfather on my mom's side kind of ended up working for it was the first CIA mission, by the way. Sorry, I left out. I buried the lead here. So unintentionally ended up working as a useful idiot for the CIA. Uh-huh. And then my dad's father probably was in the CIA. Or affiliated in some way. And the reason why that loops in is because, and I'm going to pull out this book because it has to do with Melina Mercouri. It's called The Greek Connection. And it's an amazing book that came out a few years ago about this reporter, this intrepid Greek reporter, who was obsessed with the fact that he had information that the Greek junta, the 12 generals that were controlling Greece at the time, were paying off Nixon. And when they went into the White House, or when they went into Watergate to steal the records from the DNC at Watergate, the records that they were stealing was the records that the Greek junta members were laundering money through a Greek billionaire to pay off Nixon so that they could stay in control.
Okay. Wow.
So it's a wild road. So Melina Mercouri, the main actress in this film, was in exile because she was anti-fascist, anti-junta. And they came after her, they seized property, all sorts of stuff. I mean, they were extremely aggressive. And then, earlier than that, Jules Dassin, who she ended up marrying, was on the blacklist. So
I did find that in my research. I was like, there's a Marxist behind this film. And yeah.
There's a lot of Marxist here. I'm just going to leave it there because I had to give you the personal story. Like, it really does overlap in a lot of ways, but I feel like we should talk about the film maybe a little bit. And I'll chime in. I don't know.
I do. I think that was really helpful, though, because I think you're right. Yeah. Giving us the context of that history and how it's tied to your own personal history. You understand why, in some ways, films like this that are so layered and embedded, it's like the best way to tell history sometimes because it's so complex and it's so layered and it's not what you think it is on the surface. But once you start peeling back the onion, like in this film, it's pretty incredible. And that's my favorite kind of art. You know, no one wants to see a film that's just like on the nose telling you it's politics, because politics is everything. It's how you love, it's how you fuck, it's how you eat, it's all of these things. And that's what I think this film captures so stunningly. Frank, you watched it before me, so why don't you go first with your impressions, and then I'll go. I know we both I know you loved it because you were like, you were like, you gotta see it. We were like, okay.
Oh, good, yay!
I was stoked. Yeah, I mean, I really didn't know what to expect. I didn't look up anything about the story or anything, so I was just like going in totally unencumbered. Start off right off the bat with some jaunty bouzouki. We're at the docks, and I'm like, hell yeah, I love this energy. We're going for a swim. Everyone's hanging out, and I was like, okay, I don't know what's happening, but this is great. So we're introduced to Ilya, and it's like I kind of had my head blown open just in the first like couple minutes, because they set up the like, you know, who Ilya is. And I think, you know, one of the new guys at the docks, it's Tonio. Tonio's the new guy at the dock who's like, who is that in the water? And one of the guys says, oh, well, you're your first day and you get to see one of our legends. She's a whore, but she doesn't make any prices, and she only goes with who she wants. And I was like, oh shit, I see where we're going with this. And then the first thing she does is when she jumps in the water, she says, everyone's like, oh, well, we would go swimming too, Ilya, if we had the time. And she's like, well, you would come swimming if you weren't a slave. And immediately I was like, this is unbelievable. So my take is like, this is a story in action of a woman who is the free owner of her own means of production. And she sees the world in such a liberated manner because she is not beholden to any boss, owner, or capitalist. And they even say her life is very well organized. She serves these clients when she pleases. And it was just, I was like, I couldn't believe it. I was like, it seemed like such a simple, once I understood what the concept was, I was like, of course this is the story. This makes so much sense. Like that this sex worker would be this free and independent owner of her own means, and that influence informs almost the entire ethos of the town. You know, I don't want to give her too much credit. Like, you know, the town itself seems like a wonderful place, but it really it felt like the story of like freedom versus like wage slavery in a lot of ways. So I was in on it, and then it goes so many different places that I also was blown away by. So that was my initial take. Riv, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, the initial thing was just like, where has Ilya been my whole life? And I don't want to say, we don't even have a word for what she is, I think, because it doesn't really exist in our American context. But I know she would hate the term girl boss. Like, I'm pretty confident that Ilya would not be down with like being called girl boss. She would laugh that away. But like, it's a structure that like I kind of want to put a picture of her when I think about, you know, when you're like, how do I want to like persist in my career as I have to engage with the world in that way?
What would Ilya do? Wear that little bracelet?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, amazing. I also I feel like people talk about this when I was reading and researching about like romantic comedy or comedy. I was like, this to me is a satire. Like, this is a great satire. And the character of Homer Thrace from Middleton, Connecticut, who's this like poetic imperialist.
Is his name actually Homer, or does she give him the nickname Homer?
What's his name? His parents named him that because they loved philosophy.
Oh, I missed that.
Philosophy. I have to.
Okay.
What did I write down? I took notes, guys.
I thought that was just Ilya being
great.
funny because he was like, I'm an amateur philosopher, and she was like, oh, okay, Homer. I thought it was like a dig at him.
That's why I feel like it was I was like, intentionally it felt like this is satire, because there was so much in the writing that was just also making fun, but it was also it was so grounded that people are like, this is comedy, and like just don't want to see it for what it is, you know, don't want to be the butt of the joke. But like, Homer Thrace he walks around in a turtleneck with a camera. I mean, he could be walking straight out of Williamsburg. He's determined to educate her. He's determined to bring his, like, he doesn't know why he's there. It's like the classic, like, I'm the American, I know I'm here because he's there for like Aristotle and he wants something from Greece. That just imperialist colonialist urge that he mistakes for.
I came to Greece to find the truth. is what he asks.
Yeah, like, fuck off.
Well, but he also says he wants to. He's like, I need to figure out why Greece fell. I don't buy any of the bullshit I've read in the hundreds of books. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna be able to figure this out. So he comes in with just a massive amount of like intellectual arrogance.
Yeah, and like we don't even know
He has a podcast, sorry.
Exactly. No, he totally has a podcast.
He absolutely does.
Absolutely has a podcast. And I feel like he confuses his own colonial urges for empathy and morality. And I think that's what's so fascinating about this critique and like this type of satire is like that is such a particular thing to be captured. I think where satire often gets it wrong is like they miss that sort of genuine, authentic intention and the fact that he's like, you just see him do it all, that he really believes he's the most empathetic human being determined to save her. And I just think there's so many places you can take that archetype that are so relevant currently, but it was played with such complexity too, which I thought was really great. And it was hilarious.
And he's the director too, by the way, just so folks know.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah, right.
Yes. Well, at the core of this, it really makes you confront the stigma attached to sex work, because that is really like that's like the driving, that's kind of the driving force for Homer's wanting to educate Ilya, is because of this. Right. I don't know if it's a Western stigma or if it's more of like a global stigma, but like as humans in the world and as Americans from a very young age, we're all taught that like being a sex worker, that's one of the worst things you could ever do with your life and your body and blah 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 blah. And it's like a purely puritanical based like value system. And this movie really challenges that stigma. And I remember I heard someone say this a few years ago and it stuck with me, was like, what's really the difference between, if you're talking about like a sex worker and what they put their body through, how is that different than a construction worker who absolutely like destroys their body every day on the job site? You know, like why do we consider objectifying and selling your body in this avenue as bad and wrong, but on the other side, like being a construction worker, that is okay and good and, you know, moral? If
I can push back just a little bit, there's this part in the scene, and I do want to go back to sort of like this Western puritanical philosophy, because it does actually go to some of the history of Greece, and weirdly, I think it overlays with Puerto Rico. That's why I'll leave that for a second. But there's a scene where Jules is so mad about how Jules Dassin, I'm sorry, his name is Homer. So Homer is so mad that she's changed the way certain Greek tragedies, they all end up with, and they end up at the sea, which is actually like it's a funny Greek cliche too. So this is so layered, I can't even we need like 10 hours to do this. But she has this party and all of her clients who are just completely enamored with her. It's her birthday party and it's a Sunday, and she does not have sex on Sunday, hence never on Sunday. I'm sorry, she doesn't work on Sunday, I shouldn't say that. But it's also become a colloquial, like never on Sunday, like I'm not having sex on Sunday, just internally with Greeks. So Homer comes and she basically distorts every single Greek tragedy, and he's obsessed with her knowing the truth. So he goes with her to the Parthenon, and there's an amphitheater there, a historic amphitheater, it's beautiful, and they see production of Medea. And Medea, you know, is actually a really complicated feminist figure. I think it would be fair to say she was a sorceress. They'd like to portray her as a sorceress or a witch. And of course, you know, she killed her husband's children. But with the way that she portrays it, I don't want to tell the whole story, but she changes the story so that it's like a happy ending. And so what I think that was representing, her creating this like happy ending to everything, was a form of covering up any trauma she was experiencing. Because, you know, while sex work is work, there are layers to that. And you know, it's complicated and it's within the patriarchy. And while sex work is work and should be protected, it should be protected, because there's also people who do not see it as work and see it as exploitative and treat it so, and it's trauma. But that's why she also chooses her clients. So she's sitting there around all these men, and there is a scene where this one guy kind of like forces on her and she pushes him away. So they're not ignoring that aspect of sex work. And then the party starts. It was like a game, like he was like forcing himself on her, and she's like, no, not on Sunday. And then she turns and they're all singing her happy birthday. It was really bizarre, actually, but you see what I'm saying? Like, I don't think they're ignoring all of the layers to this.
Yes, you're right. And that was a good pushback. You're right. There's much more complexity and nuance to everything that sex work entails. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
No, it was just a thought because it's...
Yeah.
But one thing that I think... So full Hellenicism is when Westerners... And I don't think it's seen negatively, generally speaking. And I think this is why there's a really weird relationship between Greece and America. So America, I would even go as far to say, and this is debatable, Greece is a satellite state of the United States. It's also a satellite state of Germany and a colony of Germany and Northern Europe today in modern world. But the modern Greek world that we live in is so much of a satellite state of the United States that the early members of the CIA, there was a Greek unit, an actual Greek unit, Greek Americans who spoke the language because the location of Greece was so important when it came to geopolitical, keeping Greece in NATO land and away from the USSR because they were involved in the left in Greece. And Greece has like 17 communist parties. They have like 3. But they're hardcore. They're anarchists. They throw bombs to this day in Exarchia. Like, it's for real. So there were prime ministers, the Papandreou family, whom Melina Mercouri ended up working for as a a culture minister. The Papandreou family lived in the United States, spoke English. There were 3 prime ministers. They were like the socialist left. And then the Mitsotakis family also spoke fluent English and lived in the United States. So there's a lot of like weird overlap. But it started, the modern version of what people see as Greeks, and I hear it all the time, like, oh, it's amazing you're Greek, what a rich history, and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, well, it was really poor country. It was like, they didn't have roads it's been 100, not even 100 years since they've been fully developed and modernized. And there's similarities between, Marin and Puerto Rico, same time period. So it kind of all started after the French Revolution, when they were looking for... There's a great book about this called The Biography of Modern Greece. I highly encourage folks to read it. It reads like a novel. But after the French Revolution, the French were like, well, we have we need a model for democracy, so started looking at Greece. And the UK got into it, or Britain got into it, and they all the intellectuals started to romanticize Greece and visit Greece, and then insert their idea, well-meaning idea. I don't think it was coming from a dark place. It wasn't like they wanted to make everybody a slave and like put them to work and put a fiscal control board on them. But they went there with good intentions. Byron lost his life in the Greek Independence War because, he believed in the Greek identity so much. Jules Dassin is a Philhellene, and he's making fun of it because he understands the relationship. But I think it would be like the liberals who want Puerto Rico to be a state. They don't understand it's much more complicated than that. And the Greeks, wanted to live their lives. Like, we don't need your version of democracy. We like the way we're living. We like living off our land. We like the fact that we can, drink all day and dance all day and go swimming, go to the sea and take 3 months off and go to the sea. And that's still very much part of the life, and that's sort of the friction. So I think Jules Dassin is representing that kind of like version. And then there's the secret figure, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, more, who I think represents something much worse than that. But sorry, that was just my little loop.
No, I love that. Thank you. I love learning all of this context, and this show is all about context, so this is crucial. So thank you.
Wait till we get to the Italian, because you're the Italian, and I need to hear your opinion.
Oh yeah, I'd love to hear your thought about that. For me, he just read as like, yeah, that's an Italian guy, yeah, for sure. Just like a little too loud, a little too pushy, a little too, what does he say? He's just like impulsive. Yes. But I want to talk about Homer really fast before we get off of him too quickly, because what's so interesting about what he brings to the story, he brings this very, like we're saying, this very Western, puritanical view of Ilya and the work that she does. And I thought it was such a smart choice by Jules Dassin, who also plays Homer, the writer-director, that in his attempt to, quote unquote, educate Ilya and show her the error of her ways, or the immorality of her ways in the work that she does, what he ends up doing is just like essentially sucking all of the joy out of her life. And I thought it was a really smart distillation of just the alienation of, I don't know, Western imperialist capitalist culture, and just how it has such a corrosive effect on the way that our relationship with ourselves, on the relationship with our work, on the way that we view one another, the way that our community functions. So I thought it was just like a perfect metaphor for how this flavor of Western culture just has the ability to, just make everything shitty. Really, like it just make everything shitty and less fun, and detaches us from what appears like with Ilya, like our most human nature and our most the fundamental things that that make life good, that make life fun and enjoyable and bring us a sense of community, everything. So I really appreciated that in the storytelling.
Absolutely.
And particularly what I loved was, yeah, he's puritanical, but there was a choice that he was going to be the philosopher, the culture worker. Like, you know, like I imagine he would be like a modern day, like, I am the cultural representative of like all things like ethnocentric, and you don't actually know why you're, you know, what's great about the Greeks. And like, you know, I think about people going over to Puerto Rico and I'll tell you what's great about Puerto Rican culture. I'll tell you it's like, you know, that, and I think it was a important, and probably we'll get into the choice behind critiquing, especially Western art and Western cinema and Western drama. But I think that was an important distinction too. It's like, we're going to replace this with classical music. Like, we're going to, there again, like, I don't know that he even identifies as puritanical. They note that he is, but like, I think he identifies as artistic and probably quite democratic. And again, like moral and educator, but the higher art. And I think that's even more dangerous than someone who comes in and is like, no, I'm of the church and like, this is puritanical, and like put on a bathing suit because you need to cover up. He's like, well, no, you should do things this way because it's actually more expressive and good for you, and you're going to like the life that you live. And I'm doing this out of love, which I just think is such a dangerous way of being. And he's just the worst.
It's funny, and I don't want to skip too much ahead. So I'll mention the one scene where it opens up where he is at this taverna, which is a local restaurant. And, you know, people drink, and no one really breaks plates anymore unless it's for performance, which is hysterical because that's the point of this. But people are breaking plates, and it was really funny because the cash register would go off every single time the plates would.
Love that. Yeah.
I was very Greek, by the way, like extremely Greek. So this fight breaks out because these men are dancing, and if you guys have ever seen Greek dancing, Zembekiko, a specific type, it's soul dancing, and you know, it was traditionally with men back then. And he starts clapping at the end, and the guy who was dancing gets so mad at him. And they start fighting, and that's how Melina Mercouri comes in Ilya and breaks it up. And she says, no, you don't understand. She speaks English, and she's learned all these languages in bed. She speaks like 10 languages. And she said, no, he's not dancing for you. He's not performing for you. He's doing it for himself. So, like, we are not your tool. We are not here for your entertainment. Dance, dance, dance. We are here for ourselves. And later, when the invisible market hand force comes in, the No Face, who's the landlord, who all of the town's sex workers, they all rent from, and he was raising the rent, he was trying, Ilya is the one who's sort of like the ringleader and can steer them in different directions. And so he was trying to get to her, and he realizes that Jules Dassin, Homer, is friends with her. And so he basically creates an offer that he can't refuse and co-opts him. And so this is where, I mean, that just happens in movements everywhere, but this is where I think there was a throwback to the Blacklist. And a name that's similar to Ilya, which is Elia Kazan, who was a Greek director, a very famous Greek director, who gave names on the waterfront, exactly, who gave names to the McCarthy Committee. And while Jules Dassin wasn't on his list, Jules Dassin was on the Blacklist and was on a list a few years earlier. I mean, he had been in exile. And so I think that was kind of like a subtle hint at, like, you never know who you're really dealing with. And especially in these, like, spaces, whether you're in the United States dealing with anti-communist sentiment or McCarthyist sentiment, fascist in my opinion, or you're actually in Greece dealing with who knows who's coming in to offer you something that you can't refuse. Or you're in Puerto Rico and you're being, sold a bill of goods because you think that the tax incentives are going to help your community. And so, I thought it was that was such a complicated choice there, and it was really smart, frankly.
Very smart. You said the term useful idiot, which I think is something very important to this story, especially in that relationship between Homer and No Face. It reminded me, how in this country, let's say the Republican Party, let's just throw something out there, like how they, a lot of those elected officials will kowtow to, the evangelical right, to out and out racists, bigots, whatever, knowing that, like, I don't really believe this shit, but, like, I know that you do, and it's useful if I can kind of, like, point you in the direction that is going to help me, even though I don't actually believe your shit. In this situation, we are aligned in that, like, you are going to help me achieve my end. So I thought, again, like, this is a really smartly constructed screenplay, steeped in politics, which is very impressive. I'm excited to check out more about Jules Dassin after this.
Right. And they married. I don't know if I mentioned that. So Melina Mercouri and him ended up marrying, and he lived out the rest of his life in Athens as a Philhellene. And he ran her foundation. She came from a political family, actually. So her grandfather was the mayor of Athens, her father, and then she, under the first elected socialist party of Greece, PASOK, which still exists, well, barely exists now, but the left doesn't exist at all in Greece anymore. It's kind of a mess. EU elections are coming up in a few weeks. Not good. So, anyways, she became an MP, and this is after, of course, she was like the most famous Greek. I think she won an Oscar. I don't know if she won an Oscar. She won Cannes, and they actually met at Cannes a few years prior. So I think Orson Welles introduced them or something.
Wow. That
time period, man. It's just, you can go through so many rabbit holes, and I'm just wonder, like, what are we doing with our lives? Are they going to 20 years from now, the next generation could be looking at me like, well, this person was on this podcast and then on that podcast.
Yeah, I feel like there was just less stuff happening back then. So it was just like, we're all going to end up in the same place because there's only like 5 things to do,
That's true.
I love it. Because I do want to move on to the epiphany that Ilya gets, but I did want to touch on the Medea speech because I thought that was my favorite scene. There were a few favorite scenes, but I loved that scene. And that I also read that scene as, again, there was so much in this that felt like the war of art and the war of art for, like, what art can be used for and who has a right to be liberated and expressive in art. And just, I love how Homer embodied so perfectly that the frustration of, like, please do it right. And I just, like, that I recognize. I'm like, I don't know how many times I've encountered someone be like, no, you must follow 3-act structure like a climax. Like,
which is whose decision? It's like a Western idea, right?
And it's very patriarchal. I mean, I loved her absolute disgust with Aristotle, and she just keeps saying to him, the man who said that men are everything and women are nothing, I don't want to hear about that man. Like, stop talking about that man to me. And he's just like, but I don't understand Aristotle. Like, he's just having such an existential crisis in her presence. And yeah, he turns, it's such a great shot because the camera, he's like in close on the camera and she's telling this glorious version of Medea and he's like having a nervous breakdown and she says the end and he literally is like, no! No, it can't end that way. And to her, she's like, my take on that was I love what you said. I think she's needing to hold on to the happy ending. But I also felt like for me, it was so liberating of like, yeah, the classics are there to be, she loves them and honors them, but she's like, I'm going to revise them. I'm going to progress. Like, to me, that is the definition of progressive. I'm going to progress. I'm going to build on. And that's where my liberation comes from. When they go and see Medea in person, she laughs at the sad parts and cries at the, and he just can't tolerate it. And there was something there too, and it's interesting how it ties into probably the director's experience with this repression of art and like what you cannot say in the art that you're making. It was so wonderful to just watch her have that full-bodied ownership of, I know the classics, I know Aristotle. She's very well, like she doesn't need him to teach her shit.
Right.
And I'm gonna do my own thing with it. And just how that torments him was so, I don't know, I think it was so relevant to, frankly, experiences I've had today when often white men are, frustrated by your desire to break structures and rules that are necessary for the production of great art, because if you don't follow those rules, well, no,
Absolutely. I mean, it was this, she made these choices with such ease too, that she sort of was Medea. I mean, I think we all probably picked up on that in her actions, like the sorceress. I mean, every man was just like, they were just like, look, I mean, it was amazing to see this power she had over men that she chose to be in the room with her. And it kind of goes up against everything that the patriarchy says. Like, that's not sexy, that's not, I mean, the whole trad wife movement is all about like the opposite of her. And she's like, no, this is my version. And he was being hypnotized by it, but resisting it too. So there was this, even an internal friction with him, you know, how his mind was colonized by his Western, I mean, his background is he's a Jewish American, but I don't know what he was as this character.
I don't know if you saw Poor Things, Nomiki, but this to me,
Also
there was
a
something...
Greek director.
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
yeah.
and I couldn't help but think about the contrast between Bella Baxter and Ilya, you know, and I loved Poor Things, I loved Bella Baxter, but there was something, I hear the critiques of having her be so young and having that body of like someone so youthful and like the childness of it, and I just so appreciated the power of Ilya's just being an, I don't know how, they never name how old she is, it's never a thing, but it was just very clear to me that you're like, this is also an older woman being desired. I guess what I'm getting at that was so liberatory about her relationship with the men in her community. And there was a certain level of, because she set those standards and rules for her work, it felt community bound. Like we actually don't see her having sex with any of these men.
Right.
You see moments of intimacy with many different men, but like a lot of the joy they're getting is because she's providing a party and like a place, you know, the best time they have is like she's like, I'm not having sex on Sunday, and everyone's still around. And I'm curious I was curious about the context of also like what that town and what's happening there, because I was wondering where all of the other women, like we don't meet any other women who are not sex workers, and like the industry seems to be very much like this working class, like people working on the ships, the dockboard workers, the sex workers. But yeah, that's so like, I'm curious about the context of that also.
So it's you know, I also think that she is representing Greece too, just like this, because they used to say things like these wild animals, like we have to control them, and they said the same thing about Puerto Rico. Like I'm telling you, there's like a lot of weird overlaps here. You know, we have to contain them and we have to show them the way. And so she was, which even in my own film, I've been playing around with this whole thing of capitalism being very masculine and patriarchal. It's not that it's a revelation. And community and spirit and art being very feminine. And those are the two forces that I have kind of playing with each other in my documentary. And I think that she is representative of all these things, and they're representative of all those things, and they go hand in hand. But Piraeus, the port, which Melina Mercuri ended up representing when she was an MP, so it came full circle. Yeah.
Wow.
And if you ever go to Athens, there's a really great statue of her. Like, it's beautiful.
Oh, cool.
Well, after watching this movie, I was like, planning my trip immediately.
Well, I'll be there this summer if you want to stop by. Just hit me up.
Honestly, it might be happening.
So Piraeus is also the port where it's a port town. You're right. It traditionally has been very working class. Everything's all different now because there were also tax incentives and golden visas, and so everything's been bought up. But Piraeus it's where people go to take their ships to the islands. So there's that one scene where they're on, it's toward the beginning, where there's a bunch of English-speaking people on a ship that's about to take off to some local island. Mykonos wasn't as big back then. It was not what it is today. But, you know, people go and tour around the islands. And so they're like, oh, isn't it all cute? They're all just swimming. And that's what the Greeks do. They're just swimming in that water. And this was, of course, Ilya had just, in the opening scene, brought all the slaves into the water and say, you know, I know you're working, but come have a swim in the port. And so the Westerners on the boat are witnessing them and saying, oh, this is what the Greeks do. They just jump in the water midday. How adorable. So it's, you know, the community, it's about 20 minutes from Athens. I think it's still kind of encompassed in Athens. Like the towns all on the Riviera there. There's a lot of very expensive towns, Glyfada, Vadi, like a bunch of that are to the east of Piraeus, which is the port. So yeah, it's very working class. I wouldn't say it's a city. I think all of those little towns are part of the greater Athens. That's why when they were getting ready to go to the Parthenon, it was only a 20-minute drive for them.
Got it.
Does that help? I don't know if that's...
Oh, big time.
Yeah, it does help. I'm also like, maybe it was a choice. It was also like, where are all the other people in this town? But I liked that. Really, the only antagonist was him and obviously No Face, who we'll get to. But the town as a whole was like all together, all one. There was no other women who were like, well, we are not sex workers and we look down upon this work. There was none of that, which kept focused. But maybe this is a good transition point to talk about the other women, because they were so crucial to this movie, because I thought they were really like the Greek chorus of women, of these sex workers.
Exactly.
Were the true heroes, because they recognized the power that Ilya had as the symbol that also Homer saw her as, but the symbol that they needed for their own personal revolution when it came time to go against No Face, their pimp. He's renting out
Pimp and landlord.
and landlord.
All
yeah.
of the above.
God. Oh my God.
All of the above. Just basically seems to own all the real estate, rent them homes at a very high price that they can't pay. So it's just, capitalism 101. No one's making any money. He's making all the profit to live. And when, I don't remember her, do you remember the character's name? The one sex worker who overhears the conversation between Homer and No Face.
No Face, yeah. And I think it translates weirdly, like as traitor or something in Greek. Like it sounds like a Greek word that I didn't know, weirdly.
Despo.
Yes. So she returns, and she's kind of the one to come wake Ilya back up to what our dude Homer's been up to, and how he's been putting her under this 2-week illusion, and this is why she kind of gets hypnotized a little bit by him, but she's still very unhappy, doesn't know what's going on, and wakes her up to this and says, like, this is the conversation I overheard, check his pockets, you'll see that he's being paid out of the pocket of No Face. And I'm not quite sure why she was never like, where did all your money come from? You had no money, now you have all the money.
Right.
But okay, we'll go with it. She wakes up to it, and there's this, like, everything in the apartment he has, he's put in all his classic books and all the Aristotle. She's now having to read it, all Descartes, all this shit. She's taken her pictures off the wall and put up his shitty art, like taken her beautiful music machine that all the men gave her, and like put his little classical piano. And so as soon as she finds this out, it's like they both have this guttural scream. They turn off the classical music, put the Greek music on, and it's just like, that to me was such a incredible scene, and just got the raw emotion of what I feel like a lot of people are experiencing now when they're being radicalized, especially like a lot of the youth, or when people are like, wait a minute, the shit that I've been taught is wrong. Y'all been lying to me. Like that raw, like rage of fuck it, we're gonna burn it all down. And that's what they proceed to do. Organized though, because this was Ilya was a plan. They knew what they were going to get her to do, and so having awakened her, they kind of go and start to, as a group, as a collective, as a movement, throw all the shit out of the apartments onto the Navy men who are like coming to have some fun with them. They throw everything out, and the police come, and then there's this amazing scene where they're in jail singing, and then we have the face off with No Face.
With No Face. Yeah, I mean, it's there's so many layers. It's just like, and I forgot, sorry to go off on, but you reminded me of when they had the party, and remember when the door was closed and there was a Greek sign, and it basically was saying it's Sunday, we're closed for singing, but it was written in Greek, so I read it. Oh, here, yeah, closed for music party. And the Russians, because the letters are so similar, they could read it, but they didn't know what it was. And they were 2 Russian sailors. And then the guy goes, it's so funny. He says, Greece is a capitalist country, no? They close for business to go to a theater. And then the other guy goes, well, the Karl Marx explains in Contradictions in Capitalism. Oh my God.
Fucking great.
So I know that didn't relate to the Medea, but, what you're saying about the Greek chorus, because the Greek chorus comes in and the men made the Greek chorus at that party sound like they were just like gossips and evil people, but, just like they thought Medea was like a witch. And it's like, well, witch is actually like kind of an awesome thing. I mean,
yeah. I was down with her version of Medea, I have to say. Like totally. Ilya's version, I love that.
It made me really rethink it. I was like, did she just only say that she killed her children? I mean, that's...
Well, and his reasoning was like, everybody says, and you're like, well,
exactly.
But we also don't know in the play, like she could be high. It's actually like open for interpretation.
And who's everybody? And I mean, now there's this whole movement, as I'm sure we've all seen, like to rewrite the classics through a feminist perspective. Yeah. And whether it's Penelope or whoever, I mean, he was onto it right away. And this was written by a man, so I believe Melina probably had a big role in all this. Mm-hmm. But just full circle here. Like, he was in the blacklist, he couldn't work, and this was part of his, re-entry into American cinema. And, Yorgos Lanthimos from Poor Things, it's almost like an inverse, because it's so hard as a foreign filmmaker, especially from Greece, to be able to make it into Hollywood today. I mean, I'm even struggling with this for the documentary. Is unfortunately I'm in Hollywood and I'm pitching, and people are like, oh, nobody cares about Puerto Rico. And like, this is coming from people who do care about Puerto Rico. They're just telling me this is what happens in these pitch rooms. And so my theory is about Lanthimos is he knew that, and he was very successful in several movies, and Dogtooth is to this day one of my favorite movies. I highly encourage people to see it. That's another great metaphor. But he knew that. And so he was like, all right, so I'll make her younger. I'll do Emma Stone or whatever. Like, he made choices that were kind of the inverse as a Greek filmmaker, whereas Jules Dassin was an American filmmaker and made it was like the opposite kind of pattern. Like, he leaned into some things because he had the privilege in some ways, but he was also on the blacklist, but he was back. And Yorgos doesn't have, well, he does now. Yorgos can do whatever he wants now, but like,
Yeah.
Well, in some ways, it's what he's saying in this film. It's the liberation and the freedom of not having to give a fuck. When you decide, right. You're like, oh, actually, I can decide to not let those values that are false, that are dictated by a system I don't want to be a part of, to strangle me in my art. I'm just gonna like choose not to. And we see that through Ilya. Like, she's like, oh, I'll try this on for 2 weeks, and she's miserable, but she just as easily throws it off. Like, actually, fuck that. No.
Well, I think it's also crucial in the production of this film that this was made outside of the Hollywood studio system. Like, this film would not have gotten made in America. Like, they're absolutely not.
Oh, no, it was United Artists. It was made in America.
Was it really?
That's
my
the great.
God.
Sorry. So it was once he kind of was brought back in. No, it's okay. But it also shows a lot about where the risks they were willing to take, even right after McCarthyism. And I think that's really important, because this shit can't be made now, and we just have like a shadow McCarthyism today.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, like it's. Well, especially after right now, they're like using the strike as an excuse to not make anything. They're like, unless you're true crime.
Yep.
Unless there's a serial killer involved and a celebrity, like we're not funding it. That's basically the loot. But I don't know if United Artists came in afterwards. So like, to be fair, that's probably was $150,000. So maybe they didn't. I don't know. They ended up taking it on eventually, but I could be wrong. Maybe he went to Cannes, they won, and that's probably when this is something to be looked into. The process of filmmaking.
This is something that someone should have done before we started recording.
No, but you know what?
I take full responsibility
Frank,
for that.
You shouldn't, because I went down a deep dive yesterday, and I was shocked by how little information there was. And I was reading like the New York Times review from 1960, and it's not, none of the analyses were that deep. I know it existed. I had to like I had to sign up for an academic journal to read one. Mm-hmm. And
wow.
No, but it was just a waste of time, frankly. But it just shows you like these older movies that are such gems and so deep and so much more profound than this, and frankly, like reflective of today's society, we don't have access to, and we don't have information about, and we don't know the history of, and Wikipedia only touches on some things. So no, I don't know. I just know that they went to Cannes and she won. Okay. So
I guess I just assumed, because it's it's clearly shot in Greece, I think, right? Yeah. So I guess I assumed it was a Greek production. But I'm glad that Jules Dassin got to make like the film that he made. It's completely, the point of view is clear, and it does not feel compromised in any way, which I really appreciate. Which just to say that, like, as you're saying, if you're playing within the studio system in Hollywood, especially like the American studio system, much more, you got to play by the rules. You got to have you got to have the hot young people in it. You got to have a really big fight scene. You got to have all the bullshit that's actually not inherent to whatever kind of story you're telling.
You have to trick people into taking their medicine. And I don't know. I mean, it's really interesting how this happened right after he was brought back into Hollywood and he made this choice, because you know there was so much to that, and especially with the Greek. I mean, a lot of Greeks were kind of under attack because of Kazan. I mean, Kazan like kind of ruined it for a lot of Greeks.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Radical filmmakers.
Because everyone thinks the same. Everyone's the same person.
Yeah. Well, he was kind of an asshole.
No,
he did not deserve an Oscar later in life, and I can't believe that people stood up for that, including Meryl Streep, by the way.
Yeah. Well, I know we started to go into this, but should we talk about No Face? Because it is interesting. That's like, you don't see it on the surface, but once you kind of realize, like, this is clearly, like you said, the free market. There's a reason we don't see his face. There's a reason that this is like the invisible hand happening. But, you know, I don't know that if I wasn't watching it with my intention on politics, I would necessarily, that would come to me.
What, just how like capitalists play behind the scenes and
Yeah.
you know break the
Yeah, or
rules
just how,
and,
like,
and do straight up corruption to maintain the status quo and maintain the system,
I
even
think,
though
like-
they say it's a quote unquote free market. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think if I wasn't looking for it, like, that's kind of what I like. It's just not on the nose, but it's so obviously there and buried. And while we're having this conversation of like, how could this film be made? I think also, like you said, there are people who went to see this even at the time and were not thinking they're seeing like a political film on the surface.
I mean, it's kind of baffling to me now. I look at it, I'm like, how did you not understand any of this? Like,
Yeah, it's a radical film.
Because they're like, it's a rom-com.
they mentioned Marx. Like, what?
Yeah.
I think, you know, the choice of the free, I mean, like, that's kind of how it operates, right? So maybe he made the choice, who knows, the commentary, but maybe he made that choice because he knew that Homer needed to be corrupted somehow. And like, it's not ever, you know, the person who's corrupted, who tries to corrupt the movement, right, is never somebody that's like the sworn enemy, which is why I always feel really uncomfortable sometimes between right-left dynamics, because, you know, it's really easy to be the enemy of the right. But like, if you're challenging, obviously, the status quo, even within, by the way, in our leftist movements, which is a whole other conversation to have, it's harder because you can't always pin where it's coming from. Is it coming from, you know, is it just a landlord, or is it Rebney, or is it money being laundered from somewhere else? I mean, they're like, I'm just trying to think of modern day politics. Like, is this actually a progressive group? Do they operate progressive? Or, oh, wait, they take real estate money? Like, what is really going on here? And so I think that was happening in a different form back then. But, you know, keep in mind, a lot of these groups that were, you know, put under the blacklist, that were part of the committee, was these groups that were being investigated were funded by foreign interests. And so maybe he was even leaning into that, like, we never really knew who was who in the space. And was it capitalism, or was it foreign, or was it not? Was it actually just left? And in his bio that I read, he did kind of, you know, say that at one point, like, he became very disillusioned because he didn't know who he was dealing with half the time. You know, they said things like, oh, you were part of this communist group. But some of these groups they weren't communist. They were like loosely associated, or turns out their funding was attached to something and they didn't know. And I don't feel like that's discussed enough about that time period, but it also, I think, is very indicative of today. Like, there's a lot of like fake progressive front groups that are really there to divide, or, I mean, we know that. That's
No, I think it's important to point out just how easy it is to either co-opt a movement, co-opt an organization, or to just create, like you're saying, just a complete front, just something that is a total smokescreen that is pretending to be something when it's not. And again, it brings us back, to the difference between No Face and Homer is that Homer is ideological. You know, he has an actual like belief system. He has a value system. And for No Face, it is purely it's purely competitive. It's purely a market-based impulse to keep his tenants and sex workers like under his yoke, just because that at the end of the day, that's the best for his bottom line. And how those two things feed into one another.
Yeah. He says to Homer, are you more interested that I should have no profits, or are you more interested in saving Ilya? And Homer's like,
I hate you, but
Boom.
I'm more interested in
That's it.
saving Ilya.
and I think that, again, that feels like the scarier of the two in some ways, because they're aligned, but you can see you can understand, like, you know, read Capital, you understand how the thing works. It's the person who's like, no, but I'm good. I'm trying to save people. And like, sometimes you just have to work with the bad guy to do the good thing. And it never ends, you know? And so this is like, clearly, like, it never ends. But I know so many people who will be like, yeah, well, you have to vote that way to save the good, or you just have to take the money from them, and then eventually you'll be able to do the thing you know, the good thing.
what was Sam Bankman-Fried's thing, that his version of capitalism? It was like, I forgot the name of it, but like, it was like empathetic capitalism or something. Like he was using cryptocurrency for good, and then he, like, you know, spent
Right.
$1 jillion on Democrats.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. It's effective altruism.
Yes.
That's what it
Yeah.
was. Yeah.
Cool. Great.
Yeah, super cool.
It's such an American thing. And I think I'll speak for myself. I know that I was inundated with that kind of thinking from youth, just from our culture, from like what you get from your schooling, from film and TV. This idea that like, well, we should be most interested in like, if I can save someone, if I'm like higher in the hierarchy, then it's my job to like save people. They don't know what's best for them. I do, because I'm like higher in the hierarchy. It's just so deeply embedded that it was also in watching this is like, yeah, you know, we're making fun of Homer, but like that is the Americanism. Like it's like, I know I was specifying it in like this very like white dude from Middleton, Connecticut, but I identify. I want to like clarify, like I get it as an American.
I was searching for the word before, and it's civilized. That's what he's trying to do. He's like, I'm going to civilize Ilya. But like when you take a step back and you're like, what, your civilization? Do you see your civilization sucks, you know? Like I don't want to be your version of civilized.
You can't even snap on rhythm.
Exactly. And there was this wonderful line on that note, because this plays into current Greece too. Like there's this dynamic. I wouldn't say Greece, there's half of Greece like really despises America because of the coup and the junta, which was backed by the US, and you know, there's that history. But higher on that list would be Northern Europe. And she makes this line. I forgot who she's saying this to. She says this line: Iceland close to North Pole, very cold. Greece, very hot. And I know that sounds silly, but this is actually very, I mean, for an American audience who just thinks that Europe is all the same, it is not all the same at all. And, you know, but again, that's also an Americanism of being like, well, all of Europe's the same. It's just all very white. And it's like, no, it is not. And I'm not saying that Southern Europe is not a white facing in some ways, not everybody, by the way, at least the United States, which has a completely different history. But it is worth recognizing that, like, Northern Europeans, which is very majority white, that are socialized, it's socialized for them, but not for the rest of Europe. And so, like, you know, they're some of the worst, even though we think they're so left. My best friend lives in Copenhagen right now. She's losing her mind. She's Armenian. And she's like, you know, they're the ones who are pushing all the immigrants and the refugees into the South who can't afford it after the North put austerity on the South. And now they take in the migrants, and then they blame the South for not being able to manage it because they don't want to make Northern Europe more diverse. And, you know, anybody who's ever been to Sicily or Greece, frankly, you understand the diversity there, and it's complicated, and it's creating lots of horrifying dynamics between the far right, like here. But that's been going on for a really long time, and this pushback. So I think it's also interesting that he came in as an American and not somebody from Northern Europe, because if he was somebody from Northern Europe, like a German, I think that would have been like, get the F out of here. Like, get out of here now. And instead, it was like this friendly American journalist type who loves Greece.
What'd y'all make of the ending? How did you interpret Homer's arc? Because I could see it in a few different ways. I guess my question is, did you think he was liberated from his own puritanical way? Like, did he learn his lesson? Was he sort of liberated when he had to take all those shots and he's finally wildly dancing? Because when I watched it twice, my first time around, I felt like it was almost a loving, like, we knew you'd get there. We got it the whole time. It was like you who needed the lesson. You who came to civilize us needed to be like uncivilized or whatever. But then there's another version of like he kind of just has like a drunken, like furious moment but doesn't fully get it. But then he throws his notebook in the ocean.
Yeah.
At the end, which made me think he's on his path. Bro's on a journey.
I wonder if it's actually Jules Dassin's journey, because he was a Philhellene. He is a Philhellene. And, you know, and then he ended up dying there and like living with Melina Mercury. And I mean, it's so subtle. Like even that Russian moment where the Russians come and they call Greeks capitalists, like Americans wouldn't think Greeks are capital, but it really did kind of, it shows the complexity of that space where yes, they were capitalists, but not really that capitalist. And, you know, he said something like, and the reason I say that is because the last line he says is, or one of the last lines he says is, Ilya was a symbol. And he said to her when they were dancing, beautiful but stupid. And then she says, why do you not save No Face? Which means he decided to not side with No Face. And then goes into Ilya was the symbol. And I don't really know what that means, honestly. What is the symbol? Symbol for what?
Symbol for liberation, symbol for, you know, organization, symbol for, I don't know, a more honest form of humanity or like lived experience, more in touch with her human nature. I kind of read it as like Ilya is the model for what we should all be striving for, at least in our worldview and the way that we like approach life, and just seeing her positive influence on everybody. And I took Jules's arc as he is liberated from, or at least he's beginning to go on the journey of liberating his mind from like all of these like Western values that he's been trying to impart on everyone else. And I loved how they buttoned the ending with the bouzouki player. And Ilya comes back to the restaurant and everyone's pissed. Ugh. Everyone's pissed at Homer. And you think it's just because of all the shit he's been doing to Ilya, but no. She's like, what? She's like, what? What's happened? And they're like, he fucking told the bouzouki player that he doesn't know how to read music, so he's not a musician. And so the guy's crying in the bathroom. And
asshole.
Such an asshole.
Could you imagine?
Yeah, I can actually.
But then Ilya comes in and she goes to the bathroom and she says to the guy, you know, like, you're the best musician in the village. You're like, if anyone is a musician, it's you. And she can't get through to him. And then she says this line, I will remember it forever. And she says, can the birds read music? So should they stop singing? And to me, that kind of like crystallized this idea of like, it's simple. Stop complicating it. Just like whatever, like the purest, most human-based impulse you have, that's probably the right one, as long as it doesn't involve like hurting other people. But like, stop complicating it with all these fucking stupid ideas about civilization and morality and rules and all of this stuff. Like, you're making it harder than it has to be, is how I read it.
If I can lean into that a little bit and bring in the Italians for a second, because I do think that's...
You know, I would love that.
Yes, the Italian in the room. I think it is why they made the choice they did. And I might be misinterpreting history a little bit here, but did you guys ever see Captain Morelli's Mandolin with Nick Cage and Penelope Cruz?
Like so long ago.
Yeah. So a lot of Greece had, especially the Greek islands, was occupied by Italy and also was in ownership of Italy. Like, it was always, they say, like, same face, same race. That's how Southern Italians see. Like, Sicily was Greece. And so there's a lot of, like, cultural overlap and things like that. So in Captain Morelli's Mandolin, a lot of the Italians ended up, like, they were occupying, I think it was Kefalonia, an island in the Ionian Sea. They were occupying it, but they weren't really doing anything. They were just, like, partying with the Greeks. And famously, you know, Mussolini at the time of World War II, Hitler didn't want him to invade. And what happened was he ended up invading. And, you know, and this is why I think the history might be a little bit murky, is, you know, there were thoughts that he was doing it because, you know, he's being reactionary and it was his moment. I took some notes here, so I don't want to like mess up the history here. But, you know, Hitler got mad, but what ultimately it did was, you know, and I'm not saying that there weren't Italians who brutalized the Greeks. It absolutely happened. And Mussolini was never fully in sync with Hitler. But Hitler had thought that there was a moment that the Greeks could be allies, because at one time Greece, and keep in mind there was a king who the Greeks didn't like, they thought, well, you know, we're going to be impartial, we're going to be, you know, and then they ended up siding with the Allies. And Hitler thought that maybe we can bring him back into our fold because it was geopolitically really important. And then Mussolini decided to go in, and then the Italian forces, yes, they slaughtered many villages, and Greece went through a shit ton during World War II and afterwards, the decades afterwards. But it was also notorious that a lot of Italians ended up defecting. There were entire infantries all over Greece, and that's what, you know, essentially I think that film, Captain Morelli's Mandolin, was portraying. And I think it's actually what the Italian figure, in a weird way represented was, I don't understand why I'm fighting you. And I don't entirely buy. By the way, Germany did come in and Hitler was mad and they occupied and it was horrible. But also Germany was held up in Greece, and that's how World War II was won by the Allies. Just full context here. So, you know, there's a lot of theories about, like, was Mussolini doing this out of spite, impulsiveness? That's important because they said that about the Italians. Or was it because he was actually playing this game, this much deeper, more complicated game? I guess we'll never know, or maybe there are people who know more. But I do think that Italian guy there was some like reference, because I think everything in this film was intentional. Nothing was accidental.
Yes. Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't want to kill their, like, what are we doing this for? Like you said, what's this all about? Some geopolitical game?
Yeah. I mean, I will just say anecdotally from my family, I have, some immediate family members who fought for Mussolini during World War II. And, I remember I've asked my dad and his cousins, like, why did they believe it? And they were like, no, they didn't really give too much of a shit. That was the explanation I got. They were just like, they just kind of got told what to do. And they were like, all right, fascism. All right, whatever. We don't care. So it makes it didn't seem that there was a really, at least from what I've been told, that the fascist ideology wasn't a really strong current, especially in working class Italian villages, that was actually getting people excited to go fight this war. So hearing you say that there was a ton of defections, I'm like, oh, that, again, a very Italian thing to do is to be like, I don't want to work anymore and just go lay down on the beach.
I mean, it was fun. It was the same thing. Oh, your island's a couple miles away from me. How are we different? We might be the same people for all you know.
Yeah.
So we're going to give some awards to this film. And our first award is Best Politics. Nomiki, this goes to the character with the best politics in the movie.
Is this a question? Ilya,
yeah,
of course.
Yeah, no, this is an easy one. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to figure out.
I have a different one.
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay.
No, I think it's, and I forgot her name again, but I think it's the one, I think it's
Despo.
I think it's Despo, because I think Ilya, she represented so much, but Despo was the one who had the consciousness and the ability, Despo was with the,
she was the organizer.
She was the organizer, and she was really living the material consequences of what was going on. To a certain extent, Ilya, because she figured it out, was living outside the system but still disconnected from those women, and she figured out how to make it all work so that Ilya could kind of become their symbol and their leader. So
I love that.
I think it's Despo.
I think that's I think you're right. Yeah.
I changed my vote. You're right.
But Ilya, of course, has to be nominated. And Ilya's just happy to be at the awards.
She's the symbol of what we want to become. She's personally empowered,
Yes.
and you just have to get her to the right space.
Yeah.
And to harken back to the classics real fast, there was the whole sex strike is just a little mini Lysistrata in here.
Yeah.
They just tucked a little truncated version of Lysistrata, which I loved. Mm-hmm. All right. Our next award is Worst Politics. Goes to the character with the worst politics in the movie. I feel like it's between No Face and Homer.
Yeah.
But I think it might be No Face because he's actually using his economic and political power in the town to exploit and oppress all of these women, whereas Homer just sucks.
It's just trying to oppress one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't blame the brainwashed. I do think he's brainwashed.
Yeah.
And that if he were enlightened, he might come around. I agree.
Yeah,
And
we're
we're led to believe that he's, on the path to radicalization at the end of the movie. Whereas No Face is out there just pissed that he lost all those drachmas.
And he's a class traitor too, because Greece has been through a lot at that point, and he's sitting there. He's probably in favor of the junta, and yeah, I agree. No Face.
No
Symbol
Face.
for everybody to hate.
All right, and our last one is Best Supporting Character / Spinoff. This goes to the supporting character that this movie should actually be about, or just who you want to see more on.
I think Despo. No, actually,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if I want to see more about. It's not that I don't think she's fascinating. I think she did just what she needed to do. Mm-hmm. I kind of want to know more about. He's not the main character. I really think Homer. We need to lean in a little bit more and what got him there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Homer in America. I have a feeling nobody thinks he's actually philosophical. I have a feeling he doesn't do well. People are like, shut up. And that's why he's like, I'll go somewhere they'll really respect me.
Or maybe in the sequel, he writes the philosophy of Ilya.
Ooh.
And, and disseminates that out into the world.
Ooh.
Yeah. Makes a bunch of money off of, yeah.
Or the Italian.
Exactly.
I don't know. Was the Italian in the? I was thinking.
It could be
There weren't
anyone.
that many characters, to be honest.
That's true. I really loved. I think the character's name was Jogo, the
Oh, yeah.
the guy in the restaurant who keeps fighting with Homer throughout the movie. I just thought and this has nothing to do with politics or whatever. I just really loved the performance, and I love how emotive he got. I loved the scene where he was crying because his mother was insulted, and then they just start playing the bouzouki at him, and everyone's just like, and it just he goes from crying to laughing, and he's just happy again. I was like, give me more of this guy. This guy's great.
Come to Greece. Everybody is that way. Like, I'm not kidding you. So that was a really conscious choice. That wasn't just him. That is, Greeks love to fight. Like the national sport of Puerto Rico is politics. The national sport of Greece is fighting. And I think oftentimes folks who are not from Greece take it like a little too serious. They're like, oh my God, they're so mad. I'm like, no, it's fine. We're just fighting. It's like a totally normal thing. Like, you'll get in a taxi and they'll fight you with you over everything. And then 2 minutes later, you're like dancing.
That's amazing. Well, this film, as we mentioned, and I think you've inspired us, because I think, of course, we like to do movies that are a broader base of people have seen and maybe can jump on the pod and listen to. But one of the joys of not being tied to a capitalist structure, because we donate our ad space and, we're able to do this because of our Patreon and our listeners, is that we can also be like, yeah, let's do a movie that we want to encourage people to see. And it's, and do some work around it. Like, sometimes it feels like, oh, I don't know. I want to just sit down and like watch a movie I'm kind of speaking for myself, but I'll be like, I want to watch a movie to just unwind and release and not have to think. But I just want to encourage people to be like, if you can get through that hump, that I experienced that, I think it's just also what's happening culturally now, and just a result of many different things. We have to retrain our brains to sit down and get over that hump of, I don't know if I want to watch something from 1960 right now. I kind of would rather just watch Vanderpump or whatever. Once you sit through that, it takes a little work, but we're encouraging you and inviting you to do some of that work. So we'll do some more obscure, important movies like this.
Especially for this film, because this is an exuberant film. Like, this film is bursting with life. It is a fun watch. So yeah, don't walk, run.
I just regret
YouTube.
I didn't have a drink. Well, you will want to like have a, you're gonna like. I wore a dress because I was like, I need to go to Greece, and like you're gonna be in a mood, so you'll have fun watching.
Yeah, you should like have some people over, grab a glass of wine. Don't do ouzo because you won't be able to be paying attention to all the subtleties. But
don't drink every time they do. You'll be done. And
if you're in Greece, let me know, because I'll send you all the directions.
As soon as we're done, I'm gonna go look up my itinerary. So thank you. Before we leave you, we talked to all our guests about how in your life you might be striving to practice your values, if they're anti-capitalist, leftist, however you define those. But is there something that you do? I know you do a lot, but is there something that you want to share with our audience that you do in your everyday life? I'm
trying to be like really intentional with my digital time. Does that make sense? And I'm saying that because it's like I really am too deep into like how the digital ecosystem works now. And some folks have asked me like why I stopped doing my show, and I was, for 10 years or so, I was on a hamster wheel of media, and it corrupted people's minds in some way. Not me, but I mean like just the space I was in, like not doing cable news anymore because why do I want to debate who's sitting at a podium right now, or like some stupid thing Donald Trump said? Like, I'm just wasting my time, my energy, and frankly my pay, because it wasn't that high, where I could be doing other things like reading and writing, and that's the art. And I mean, there's really great artists that reflect on this in a much more profound way about how we need the time and space to be able to process things and create beautiful art. And I was on this weird hamster media wheel, and I think, and that's what I really like about your show. Like, I've noticed how you guys are really intentional about how you produce it, and patrons are a really big part of it, but when you get sucked into the disgusting algorithm that exists, it's quietly corrupting our movement. I will speak firsthand. I mean, I think that folks, viewers and hosts, are relying on the way the algorithm is generating content, so they start to switch their content. And I just realized it wasn't serving me anymore, and I wanted to do something much deeper, and simultaneously I was working on a documentary, and so I'm reading more, I'm writing more. It's slow. It's really slow, but it's really beautiful. And obviously I have to make money, so I have to come up with clever ways to do that. But it was just draining me. So I don't know. That wasn't a deep thing like thrifting, but
I thought that was
I
thought that was pretty deep
answer.
And resonates a lot with something I'm trying to practice. Is like slowness opens up space to process and read and write. That's really big, and that is so, it just gets harder and harder, and we have to fight for it. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. I mean, art is what we're striving for, right? Like, they don't want us to produce art. which is full circle about this film, right?
Yeah. Nomiki, this was such a joy. Thank you for
So
bringing this film
fun.
into our lives. So we will have you back on when your documentary is finished. And actually, you're raising money right now for the post-production process. Is that right?
Exactly. While we have our impact campaign going, which has been great, and we're sharing videos and going to the Hill and have petitions, we're raising money for the film, and it's become this partnership. So the film, you can go to losingpuertorico.com, losingpuertorico.com, and there's a donate button, and that goes to post-production right now. We have almost entirely been crowdsourced in ways which, was crazy actually, but now we're hitting the final stretch where it's really important we stay on schedule. So thank you guys.
Yeah, we'll link to that. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. This is so fun.
Thank you all so much for listening. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok. And if you want to support the show and get access to our Patreon episodes, the link is in the episode description in your podcast player or at mvcpod.com.
For next week, we will be watching the 1968 horror classic, Rosemary's Baby.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.